Welcome back, everybody. I don't know the best for you to do this in. I don't guess it matters. Welcome back to a week 2 Zoom session for EDL 710, Leading Instruction and Assessment. I see I've already got a question posted by Ray. I'll answer that right this minute. On your final exam, I'm asking you for your top 10 takeaways, and it's your 10 takeaways. It does not have to be one takeaway per week or per week. Some of you might have several takeaways in week 1 on instructional design considerations, and some of you may not have any. So Ray, it's just your top 10, whatever they happen to be. Okay, let me get to a few preface comments as I have last week, and then I'll allow you all to pepper me with questions and see if you can stump the professor. Thanks again for partnering with me in your learning journey. It truly is an honor to be able to get to share with you in this process. I know those of you that are working in the traditional school settings, some of you finished school last week, some are finishing this week. Never see another poor day now. And some of you, I think the longest one I've heard of is going to go to mid-June. And then, of course, those of you in the non-traditional settings like correctional facilities and JAD, DAP probably just run through the summer. But in any event, thank you again for letting me join you in the process. I want to remind you what I told you last week. My intention in this process is to see if I can infect your thinking. I'm in the catbird seat, if you will, because I have the opportunity to see if I can push your thinking in ways maybe that you haven't thought before, or expose you to some content perhaps that you have not considered before, or even if you have considered the content or the topics before, maybe stretch your thinking to new ways. A reminder or two, in week 7, we will not have a Zoom session. You'll have your final exam instead of that. And I think you all are beginning to understand the drill now, those of you that are new to me, that each week is structured exactly the same. And you're going to get the same questions every time. I've fielded several emails from you, those of you that for some reason or another are not getting your receipts up from the Google Forms. And send me an email if you're concerned about whether or not your learning task submissions landed, and I'll be happy to get back to you. I think most of you have discovered by now that as professors go, I'm very responsive. I'll get back to you quickly. And I hope it's helpful always when I get back to you. I want to remind you now to push yourself as you're considering this content. I want you to push yourself to think through the lenses of school leadership. Most of you are still in the classroom setting with either children or early childhood or adolescent learners. But increasingly, as you're moving through this process, I want you to prepare yourself and think from the perspective of, okay, I'm going to increasingly become a teacher of adults. Not always willing learning adults. So I want you to think like that. And I actually kind of pitched you a curveball this week in week 2. We'll talk about that later. The APA citations are causing a little bit of heartburn, and as they always do. Just a reminder, the 4 big pieces in that process are who created the content, and the name of a person or persons. Who is the creator of that content? Secondly, the year that the content was created. Thirdly, what's the title? The title of the blog, or the title of the article, or the title of the book, or the title of the video. And then finally, 4th, where you found it or where you got it, where you laid your hands or your eyes on it. If it's a website URL, then you retrieved it there. If it was from the library, then you would be from the book publisher or from the journal that published it. If it was from a blog site, as some of them have been, then it would be the website of that blog. The trickiest ones will be every once in a while I'll pitch you a PowerPoint presentation. You'll have to dig and scratch a little bit to try to find all four of those components. In week 1 and 2, week 1, I'm fairly generous, and I'll poke you and I'll say, hey, wait a minute, that doesn't look quite right. And one of the reasons I give you the brain trust stuff is so that you can go back and look at all of your classmates' contributions, and most of them got the APA citation correctly, so you can find it there. As well as for those of you, a few of you, I've been kind of nudging you along, trying to get you to get me a little better view into your thinking on your submissions. So if it's not quite up to what I think it ought to be for you, I've been poking you a little bit. You can go back in that brain trust and take a look at that, and you can see all 80 or 78, 9, however many are in there now, of what they have contributed, and you can get a good feel for what's going on. I didn't check. Ray, I'm looking at you right now. Can you hear me? Okay. I want to make sure. I have blathered on for 15 minutes before. Not a soul could hear me. They didn't seem to bother them. Kind of hurt my feelings. The brain trust, if you look in week 2 now, you can see the week 1 brain trust and all the stuff that came in and got graded so far. There's a few late submissions that came in that haven't been graded. So if you look in the grade book and you don't see that you got a grade yet, that probably means that you were a little late getting there, and I haven't gone back and gone to do the cleanup work on the grading yet. Let's talk about your LT, your learning task responses, about what I'm looking for. I want to see that there's some critical analysis of the content on your part. If it looks like you quickly typed it out on your iPhone while sitting at the stoplight on your commute, probably not going to be the quality that I'm looking for. For instance, if you told me one of your top 3 takeaways is you learned hudagogy, pretend I don't know what hudagogy is. What is it? Pretend that I don't know what you consumed when you're telling me your top 3 takeaways, and that will be fine. I am not looking for dissertation length stuff, although I'm happy for those of you that like to write and use a lot of words. Okay, that's fine. But I do want to see that there's some real critical analysis going on there on the part of all of you. Week 1, as you know, was focused on instructional design considerations, and now we're in week 2, about halfway into week 2 actually, and it's the nature and components of the learning tasks. So it's kind of a different lens through which we can look at the teaching learning process. In your comments and your responses on the Wiggins and McTighe stuff last week, the understanding by design stuff, many of you seem to be drawn to that triad that they mentioned: the acquire, making meaning, and transfer. Again, I want you to think about that in terms of how do I make that happen with a group of adults, whether I'm talking about a grade level team, whether I'm talking about the science department in my building, whether I'm talking about the entire faculty on my campus, or those of you that we have 1 or 2, I think it's already working in central office. And sometimes you find yourself standing in front of several hundred people trying to capture their attention and bump their thinking a little bit. The scaffolding, 1 or 2 of you noted in your discussion forum stuff and in your learning task responses that you use the concept of scaffolding with the curriculum in your classroom. Think in terms of that with professional development too. We're not going to do a study, but I suspect many of you have sat through professional development stuff that seem completely disjointed, and even within the day of a professional development setting, and certainly disjointed if you look at it through the lens of the whole year of professional development. And as a servant leader and an effective servant leader, think about ways that you can scaffold the professional development for those adults that you're going to be working with through the whole course of a year. One or two of you mentioned that you had some training on understanding by design, or backwards design, as it's in the common vernacular. And as is often the case, you get a dose of it in August, and everybody's pretty happy high about it, but they don't stick with it. They just assume you got it on the first try. Very much like third graders, us older folks need several doses before we get it. The Heidi Hayes Jacob thing, I've been a fan of Heidi Hayes Jacob for years. Really, she made most of her original splash on the education scene talking about curriculum mapping. But it reminded me in that video and your responses to that video, 7 years ago when I was a superintendent of a fairly small district, and this is, I said 7 years ago, we were already, at that time, we were already at one-to-one devices pre-K through 12 in our district. And we had some teachers that were really going great guns with using technology to enhance the learning process for the children. And I had a lady that was the chairperson of a group of instructional technologists for districts, for about 50 or 60 districts out in our region. And she asked if I would come speak to them at their quarterly meeting about how our school was using technology to enhance the learning process. And I said, Christy, absolutely, I love to do it, but with one condition. She said, okay, what's that? I said, I want to bring kids and teachers to do the presentation. I don't want to stand up there and talk to you all for an hour and a half. And she went, oh, cool, great. So 7 years ago, again, think about this, 7 years ago. So I carried the first grade teacher and one of the first grade teachers in her class to talk about how they were using blog spaces, wikis, Tumblr, and Twitter in the classroom to enhance the learning experience. And the teacher was having the children demonstrate, we're talking about 6-year-old children, demonstrate these applications for 60 to 70 adults. And one of those first graders was roaming around the room with an iPad, typing in, taking a picture and typing in elements on Twitter in live time. And you talk about it, they made a great splash. I had a middle school teacher and actually one of our football coaches and several of his students, they demonstrated how he was using Google Forms and the application functions within that to take care of the assessment pieces in his middle school science classes, and how it was giving immediate feedback to the students about their proficiency on that particular lesson or that particular chapter of the book. I had a high school English teacher that brought in some of the English, this was senior English, and what she did was brought in a few of the seniors that she had given them the assignment of taking a real famous, Elizabeth probably knows this, I should, I don't, I'm not that great on art, but the teacher had taken a very famous painting of a group of people in an all-night diner, and the picture is looking through the window. Some of you will know the name of it, I'm sure. But and what the teacher had done is asked the students to pick one of the characters in that famous painting and write a story about why that person was there and what they were thinking while sitting in that all-night diner in the middle of the night. And then use Cam Studio and Audacity to make a recording of them reading their own essay and then posting it to a class website for public consumption around the world. And so that senior English teacher and those students demonstrated those technologies for that group of 60 to 70 instructional technologists. And I don't know, let's see. We were probably talking about square miles of the people, the square miles of those instructional technologists served probably in the vicinity of about 10, 12,000 square miles of school districts out here. But that's just an example of how you can make that stuff happen. And as I was reading your discussion forum post in particular, several of you seemed pretty energized by what you saw out of Heisey Hayes Jacobs' video. And somebody also noted one of Dr. Jacobs' points was that she feels strongly that we have to move beyond just being literate from a printed text perspective, but move into media, global, and digital literacy for teaching for our students and also for the adults in the building. That brings me to another point. But that's interesting too, because about a year ago I was asked to speak at a conference in Amarillo, Texas, by the Texas Literary Academy, I think was the name of the organization. But what they asked me to come speak to them about is my thoughts on the fact that literacy is not just about reading and writing anymore. It is in fact about media, global, and digital literacy. On the topic of professional development, and then we'll move on to something else too. I'm still connecting dots with Heisey Hayes Jacobs. I told you in that school district that I took those children and teachers to do the professional development with me. When we decided to move to one-to-one devices, pre-K through 12. By the way, we used mixed devices. We used some Chromebooks, we used some iPads, we used some notebooks. At the time they were called Acers. They were real expensive, inexpensive little compact notebooks. And then some of our students, the older grade students, had some full-size laptops and some Macs too. And I'll comment on that as well. I was at a conference, at a computer educators conference about 10 years ago, I guess. And is often the case when you go to conferences, you know, you get some really good stuff when you go to the lectures and the breakout sessions and the general sessions. But some of the very best stuff happens at the lunch table, the breakfast bar, and at the bar at happy hour. It's where you learn some real good stuff. And I happened to be eating lunch one day, and just down the table from me, I heard two people from the Dallas area get in a conversation about their one-to-one programs, technology programs in their respective schools. And one of them made the point that that they were exclusively PCs on their one-to-one program, and the other one said that they had been exclusively Macs in their program, but they had, after discussions among themselves at their school, they had decided to begin mixing the kinds of devices because Macs are really cool and they're trendy, and you can almost have a man bun when you're using one of them. Well, not all of us, but they came to the conclusion that most of the students, when they were transitioning into the university setting or into the work settings, it was predominantly PC environments. And so they began mixing their devices on their one-to-one program because they wanted their students to be, even though those machines do pretty much the same task, they have their unique dialects, if you will. And so they wanted their children, when they graduated from high school, to be just as comfortable using a MacBook Pro as they were using a Hewlett-Packard PC. And I thought, you know, hell, that's right. Yeah. So when I came back to our school, I began talking to our instructional folks, and we also began integrating various kinds of devices with our children, because we wanted them to be, I'll call it ambidextrous with regard to their ability to handle those different kinds of devices. One more comment on that. I'm doing a lot of blathering. You didn't come here to listen to me talk. But once we move to that one-to-one environment, and this happens a lot, I've seen it a lot. In fact, when I worked in large schools in the Austin area, we ran off the track so often when we would put a lot of expensive equipment in front of the teachers and issue it to them. and say, go forth and multiply. And about half of them didn't do it. And so when we began going to this one-to-one program in this district where I became the superintendent, we began doing the professional development during the school day with the teachers and students at the same time. So for instance, when we were adopting the Google Suite, education suite, rather than giving the teachers a day of professional development in which we were talking about Google Docs and Google Sheets and Google Slides, I forgot what they call those, and then hoping the teachers would take them and use them, what we did is we bunched students across grade levels with 2 or 3 teachers in the classroom with them, and we did like a rotation, like a conference breakout rotation with those folks. So you had everything from kindergartners through seniors in high school with 2 or 3 or 4 teachers. And then in each classroom, we had some high school students that were in the tech classes that served as facilitators. So in one classroom that you would move to, for instance, you would be looking at and learning about Google Calendar. And so there would be a short video tutorial on what it was and how to use it and stuff. And then there would be a little guidance on, okay, so now let's get your hands dirty on it. And so everybody starts digging in. And the teachers began to feel a little sideways pressure there, because if the teacher was struggling with how to do that Google Calendar, it was not at all uncommon during those settings for the 3rd grader to lean over there and say, you know, Dr. Coulter, I think if you'll put your finger on that and move it over here, it'll work. And so the students and the teachers became co-learners in that process. But by design, it put a little pressure on the teachers too, because they then knew that the students knew that they were being expected to use those products as part of the instructional environment. A lot of talk. Let me move on. Let's talk about Blaschke, pedagogy, andragogy, and pedagogy, or the other way around, however you want to do it. You're welcome, by the way, because there's not a lot of people that talk about those words, I have found, interestingly enough. And Dr. Blaschke really began pounding that drum 7 or 8 years ago. And I pitched in one of your discussion forum prompts a little homework assignment to you to try to get you to actually analyze someone else's contribution through the lenses of pedagogy, andragogy, pedagogy. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I want to share with you, and a few of you may have actually been in a class when I've talked about this back in the fall. I can't remember. If I've forgotten, maybe you forgot. Pedagogy. Here's just one more way for you to get your brain around those concepts to think about it. Pedagogy. Think of it as other-centric learning. An other-centric learning model. And here's what I mean. Because most of you that went through traditional college preparation programs and education programs, you got a ton of stuff on pedagogy. Those of you that are alt-cert, it depends on the program whether or not they give you much of that or not. Certainly, when you move into the work environment in the school setting, you get a lot of talk about pedagogy. Pedagogy is other-centric learning model. And by that, I mean this. Somebody else decides what you're going to learn. Somebody else decides how you're going to learn it. Somebody else decides if you learn it. And somebody else decides what to do if you didn't. Now that's the model that most of us are trained in as educators. And to be fair, there's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely, we don't need to let first graders decide whether or not they want to learn to read and how they're going to do it. Somebody else needs to make those decisions for them. Let's move to andragogy now. Andragogy is not a completely other-centered, it's sort of a shared learning model. in this sense. Think of andragogy this way. Somebody else decides what you need to learn. Standards. Somebody else decides what you need to learn. But then, after that, how you learn it, whether you got it learned, and what to do about it if you didn't learn it becomes a shared endeavor between the learner and the teacher. Okay? So andragogy, you can think of andragogy as a shared learning model. Again, you got the patriarchal, somebody else is deciding what you need to learn, but then after that, then it becomes very cooperative in nature. And then on the far end, on the other end, heutagogy, and obviously, and as Dr. Blaschke calls it, self-determined learning. Those of you that are musicians, you're probably there. Gardeners, yeah. If you do yoga, you've probably engaged in a lot of heutagogical activity. Those of you that are intensely spiritual and very disciplined in your pursuit of the knowledge of your faith, probably extremely heutagogical in that learning model. So in line with my thinking, we've moved from other-centric learning model to a shared learning model to a completely emic, to steal a word from the psychology world, self-determined, that's the word, that's the phrase that Dr. Blaschke used, that's a good one, self-directed, self-determined learning. You, the learner, decides, what do you want to learn? How are you going to go about it? Whether you learned it or not? And what are you going to do if you didn't learn it as well as you wanted to? Most of you that are in the chairs that you're in tonight are living very much in that heutagogical end of that continuum. Now, some of you are just doing it because you heard how much money principals make, and you've decided that that's what you're going to chase, the big dollar. Sorry. But most of you you're in pursuit of the degree for much more intrinsic reasons than extrinsic reasons, which makes it very heutagogical in nature. Okay, essential questions. That was one of the learning task content pieces that I threw at you. And I'll just make a comment on this because several of you commented on the power of asking powerful questions. And I'll just share with you briefly a personal experience of that. It was about 10 years ago. I was at a conference for principals, and I was having a conversation between sessions with a friend of mine, and we were discussing Bob, who happened to be a friend and colleague of ours that had retired. And as we were gushing praise on Bob, this friend of mine said, you know, the thing about Bob, I think he was the best listener that I ever knew. And as I walked away from that conversation, I thought, hell, I want people to say that about me. What a powerful tribute is for someone to recognize and acknowledge you as being a quality listener. And so I put it on my growth plan. And yes, I have a growth plan. Those of you that have been to my personal website, you can see my current growth plan. I have had myself on the growth plan for 12 years now, maybe 14, I'm not sure. And we're creeping up on June. June every year is when I revise my growth plan for myself. Because I actually accomplished some of the things that I have on my growth plan. But for about 3 or 4 years running, I decided to put becoming a better listener on my growth plan. I began reading articles, books, watching videos, listening to podcasts, talking to people that I thought were powerful listeners, trying to consume as much content. It was a very heutagogical endeavor. And I wanted to become a better listener. And in that process, I came to the stark realization that in order to be a powerful listener, I really also needed to be a better questioner. And so that got added to my my growth plan as well. And I can say happily to you, you know, in this setting, here I am just jabber, jabber, jabber. You wouldn't think I could listen to anything, but it was a powerful learning experience for me. And I think if you and I ever had opportunity to be face to face, I trust that you would walk away from that experience feeling like you had been heard deeply and well. That reminds me also, when I was the principal of a large high school in the Austin, Texas area, we forged a partnership with a group of tutors to help our struggling learners. And the organization was actually a group of military veterans. They were called veteran tutors. And the gentleman that served as their CEO in that organization, there's like 10,000 of them in that greater Austin area. So it wasn't just a small group. I mean, they were serious about helping kids. It's a great partnership. But Richard, the CEO of that group, used to say to me, and I connected this to that essential question thing, is he said, you know, Nelson, what we got to do with those kids is we got to grab them by the imagination. And I thought, oh, that's cool. That's cool. And he said, you have to ask them questions that pique their interest, that pull them in. And he said, most of the struggling learners operate from this mindset. You can't make me, but you can't stop me. And I thought that's a great way to think about how to approach children that struggle. Is grab them by the imagination, knowing full well that if we're successful in that, they may take that approach, you can't make me to start with, but if we can grab them by the imagination, then they shift into you can't stop me. Great idea. I miss Richard. Great guy. He was a former Green Beret. Quite a character, by the way. Reflectification. So there were some very insightful comments by those of you in that discussion forum. It was purposefully provocative. I'm sure you'll be surprised to know. And I want to comment on the pedagogical technique that I used, and this has to do with the nature of the learning task. Something that I'll just point this out, and then we'll move on. Mm-hmm. Young learners and old learners alike. If you can bake them into the learning process with something that has an emotional attachment for them, for the learner. If there's an emotional attachment for the learner, you're going to get a higher level of engagement. It's just going to happen always. And it doesn't matter if you're talking about 5-year-olds or 55-year-olds. Mm-hmm. Learning task 1.5. Every week you're going to get it. And how might you design professional development, ... You're going to get that 6 more times after 1.5. Almost without exception, every one of you are going to be involved in design. Some of you already are, of course, but most of you are going to be involved in designing professional development at some point in your career. Many of you, it will be decades of your career. The collective thinking of this 80 group of learners, our learning community. If you look in that brain trust in the learning task 5 every week, you're going to have a huge collection of content that some smart people have dug around for and put it in a nice list for you. And they've also done the higher order thinking skill thing out on the very end, and they told you whether they think it's good or not. Use it. Week 2, we shift to nature and components of the learning task. That should be fun. And I want to give you a warning on that one. Learning Task 2.2 is the video by Brett King. Some of you, I'm sure, have already looked at it. I haven't peeked in your responses yet, but you're probably going to go, why in the hell is he giving us a video by a guy that's talking about banking? What does that have to do with education? It's metaphorical. And I want you to watch that video and consume that content with your metaphorical, analogical hat on. He is talking about banking mostly, but as you watch, consciously replace King's references to banks and financial services with the word school or education. And while you're watching that video, consciously replace his references to money with the word learning. And here's why. In that, he makes a very compelling case that the banking industry is being turned upside down because of the behavior of the end users. That would be you. The people that use the banking and financial services are forcing the industry to change or die. Same thing's happening in education. Same thing is happening to education. The end user, by the way, that's exactly why you're sitting in this class tonight. 30 years ago, you would have not had this option. You chose not to be in a face-to-face setting and drive to a college or university campus tonight. There's a reason you're sitting there being able to eat. Some of you probably not even wearing your pants. I am tonight. But you are the end users, and you're forcing this industry to change. Same thing's happening in the K-12 environment. As you always, I'm going to pitch a few books at you that I made connections with from reading your responses or thinking about your responses. One of them that I made a connection with during the week was Stephen Covey's 8th Habit. Somebody, I forgot who it was, mentioned, well, it was on the Wiggins and McTighe stuff when they talk about start with the end in mind. The late Dr. Stephen Covey got quite famous with that phrase as he was conceptualizing and writing about what he called the 7 habits of highly successful people. His best book, I think, through his lifetime, and everything he wrote, I read. It's all great stuff. But his best one, I think, was titled The 8th Habit, From Effectiveness to Greatness. He wrote that in 2004. And he died sort of tragically in a bike accident about 3 years or 4 years ago. It hadn't been too long. I was a great fan. Someone mentioned the importance of us thinking divergently. Actually, several of you, but 1 or 2 of you actually used the word divergent, which immediately made me think about the Hunger Games. Good books, love them. I just absolutely loved them, and I think I'm divergent. 1 or 2 of you, and then one of the videos, actually, no, the podcast in which the interviewer interviews Zamuda and Kalik. I can't remember if it was Dr. Zamuda or Dr. Kalik that referenced the Schwann and McGarvey book titled Inevitable, Mass Customized Learning. That's a 2012 copyright, very good book. Colleen is the one that mentioned that in Learning Task 5, if you care. And then finally, Brett King, that you're watching the video in Learning Task 2.2. I'm actually right about to finish a book that he wrote titled Augmented Life in the Smart Lane. And he talks about not just banking in that book, but the way technological evolution and hyper warp speed evolution of technology is turning industry after industry on its head, and it's changing the way we live and think, and will continue to do so forever. So a very good book. Very good book, and one I think it's absolutely. He doesn't spend much time about talking about education, but it is not a big jump for us to connect those dots. Question and answer time. I'm going to look at the chat box first, and then if somebody wants to ping your microphone and you're tired of listening to me, we can listen to somebody else talk. Pamela asked, did the students have one device for the entire year, or did they use different types of devices or for different classes. When we issued those, the way we handle that, Pamela, is we kind of mix the devices per grade level. So, for instance, the third graders might be using the Acer notebooks, and then at the end of the year they turn them in. And then when they moved into fourth grade, they might have iPads. And at the end of the year, they turn them in, and at the end of fifth grade, they might have a full-size laptop, maybe a Hewlett-Packard, and then Chromebooks. And so as they advanced through the grades, they were getting their hands on lots of different devices, different types of devices in the process. Let me look here for other questions. That book was... Question, what task are you referring to that refers to banking? Dana, that's learning task 2.2. It's the video by Brett King. No. That was. Is that right? Dawn, help me out. Say it out loud.
I have a video talking about Sparks in 2.2.
Yeah, me too.
Have y'all not seen the Brett King video yet?
No.
Oh.
Yeah, I was a little confused.
I'm okay. That must be 3.2. I must be a week ahead of myself. Okay. Oh, you're going to like Peter Benson too. Yeah, you know, I think I mentioned this to you all. For 14 years, for the last 14 years, I've been teaching principal preparation classes at UT Austin, and those were longer terms, and it was all face to face. And I was able to pitch a pretty large project at those students. But one of those teams of students introduced me to Peter King, and it really had a profound impact on the way I approached the work in the schools that I was working in at the time. My apologies. Sorry, I misled you all. You're going to see Brett King talk about banking. But yeah, Peter Benson 2.2, it's on Spark. My apologies. Dana says that's the EDL 700 class. Was that for me? Oh, okay. Yeah. So I've been outed. I'm repeating myself. I got my notes off now, and pepper me with questions if you have them. If I don't know the answer, I'll do what my physician friend, Dr. Roby Mitchell, AKA Dr. Fitz, says. If I don't know, I'll just make some shit up. Will I give you feedback as to the citation being correct or incorrect? That's from Felicia, or Fifi, I guess. If it's not correct, I'll let you know. And once we get past week one, and week one, I'm kind of gentle, you know. Week two and beyond, if you get it wrong, I'm probably going to say, I'm going to reduce your grade and say, citation is wrong. If you want to correct it, tell me what the correct citation is, and I'll revise your grade back up. I'm not trying to. I want you all to be successful. Believe it or not, not looking for ways to make you look bad or feel bad. And Fifi also said she noticed in the brain trust that there were some variations. In the brain trust, what you see is what people submitted. So you see some that are grossly wrong, and you see some that are perfectly correct, and then you see all in the middle. As I mentioned to you all last week, I'm not a purist on that topic. What's important for me is that you and I both get in the habit of leaving a clear breadcrumb trail for other learners to get to that content. Who created it, the year it was created, the title of the product, and where it can be found if another learner wants to go get it. Now, when you get ready to do your dissertation, as you chase your doctorate, your dissertation committee is going to be picky as hell about it, and they're going to drive you crazy, but that's part of their job. part of their job is to make people that want to have doctorates feel stupid. And they're very successful at that. Other questions? If you got them. And Dana brought a new student to class. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go to the porch and drink scotch with Mo if y'all don't. Okay, there's a question from Brandon. The standards varied. Good point, Brandon. What were the correct standards? It's not a matter of correctness. It's a matter of how your brain connects those dots. So it's not right and wrong. And do I know that some of you quickly catch on to me and just click one and go on? Yeah. Same thing happens in your 4th grade classroom and your 7th grade classroom. And people are always going to game the system. But by and large, most of you are going to play. You're going to play authentically and legitimately, and you're going to try to learn for learning's sake. No, Fifi, I don't. No. Now, in one of my other courses, we do that, but not this one. I think I've mentioned this to you all before. The chat box does not show up in the recording, I don't believe. Isn't that correct? I mean, so once we turn the meeting off tonight, whatever's in the chat box disappears. That's one of the reasons I like to make sure I answer the questions that you put over there so that it makes it into the audio video. Teresa Non asked, how many courses do I teach? For LSU Shreveport, right now I'm pretty much the only supervisor of the interns, the EDL 716, quite a few of you are doing that with me. But for the academic courses, right now this is, I think, the 4th one I've taught. However, this current school year that we're finishing right now, I have served as what they titled visiting professor. There's enough of you that jumped into the program that they needed to add help, but they were not willing to make any long-term commitments to that help. And so for this whole year, I've been visiting professor at LSU Shreveport. As of yesterday, LSU Shreveport and I have agreed for me to become full-time assistant professor, which is good for me because now Mo has a lot more stable money to spend over the next few years. And she loves to buy cows. She loves to buy land and cows, but she doesn't hire any cowboys other than me. But they tell me, we'll see, time will tell, they tell me when I move into that from visiting professor to assistant professor role, I get a little more money and a little less work. I've never had a job quite like that, certainly not anything in school administration, so I'm not holding my breath. We'll see what happens on that. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Glad to do it. I love this work. I love working cows and building fence and welding stuff, and I love all that stuff too, but I can see the finish line from here. I don't have many years left that I can try to influence folks like yourself. And so I'm going to continue to try to infect your thinking as long as you'll listen to me. And I think I'll know when you quit. I believe I will. For learning task, Fifi says my comment was that it wasn't substantive. If you look at the rubric, Fifi, in the syllabus, the language I use in there, and yes, it's subjective. There's not a way for me to assess people's writing in a completely objective way. So at the end of the day, the professor gets to decide whether it's minimal, adequate, or substantive. And so if you got one of those comments of it's adequate but not substantive, when I read it, I was thinking, I'm not sure they fully engaged with the content. And so that I was poking you a little bit, trying to get you to rethink. The cutest cows are in Switzerland. Well, we have a few milk cows as well. Other questions, if you got them. I know some of you probably have another class fixing to start. What if there is no date? Laura, I'm assuming you're talking about some of the content. On some of that content, there won't be a date, and I'm not going to let you take a free pass. If you look in that brain trust, and out of 80 of you, 65 of you found the date that the content was created, tells me it can be found. So if they don't have a date overtly on there, dig and scratch a little. Yeah, you can almost always find when it was created. Probably not at the stoplight, though. Other questions, if you got them. And those of you that are in the last week of school, I forgot who wrote this book. It's been several. It's probably 10 years ago. It was written by a teacher, and she said, "If you don't feed the teachers, they eat the children." That's especially true in May. So those of you that are finishing up, I know, been there. Glad I'm not there right now. Brandon, want to know if you can resubmit a learning task. If you want to. I mean, if you're asking if you can resubmit if you got a poor grade, no. But although some of you are going to hear from me, you know, your APA citation is not correct, and if you'll send me the correct citation, I'll revise your grade upward. If you submit one and you feel like you screwed up, Brandon, then you can submit again, because when I sort them by your name, it'll stack your two together, and then I'll see both of your efforts, and I'm gonna give you credit for your best one. Nope. I'm gonna catch you when you did it worst and see how bad I can give you. One more wake-up day. Yeah. You know, so quite a bit of my career was spent as a high school principal. Holy cow, that last week's miserable. I can't tell you how many graduates. And I was principal of a small rural school at one point. Not only did I go through the last week the typical stuff, I was also responsible for organizing and pulling off the all-night project graduation party afterwards. And I was a zombie by 6 a.m. the morning after graduation. Okay, I'm going to shut up. Again, thank you all for letting me be part of this journey with you. It's an honor. I will see you on the internet, both textually and visually and auditorily next week. Have a good week.